Thank you very much. For me, it's a great pleasure to take part and to thank my colleagues who agreed to accept this invitation, which is very important webinar organized for the whole globe. To discuss the questions, socio-environmental questions. I'd like to welcome all those who are now with us. I'd like to express our support to our Ukrainian friends who are now go through very serious suffering of the war. I would like to present you to our guests. I'll start by myself, Elia Mater, director of Akatung University, which works on consumption, issues of consumption and consumers. We make our contributions to investigate, to research, to research issues of consumption, communication with we have a lot of communications with respective universities, including universities, NGOs. We promote conscious consumptions as a tool which everyone can use. And now I'd like to introduce to you Monica, Gregory, and Pallano. I'd like to thank them for taking the time to take part in this panel and in this course. I'd like also to thank Alvaro for organization of this panel. Monica is co-founder and director of Cause in Brazil. She is engaged in research of stakeholders communication, social communications, and she's a special conduct of consumers. She has more than 20 years of experience in marketing branding with national and international enterprises. Welcome, Monica. Andrea is a founder and organizer of Virata Sustentable, which is one of a very famous initiatives in awareness campaigns in support of conscious consumption. He lives in Sao Paulo, and he is really engaged in all these efforts, cooperates a lot with various entities which have adopted these approaches, and I'm really happy to see him here. Andrea is a journalist by his background, but he has engaged a lot in research of consumptions and conscious consumptions. And these are the topics that we are going to discuss with respect to defense of democracy and solidarity. Before I give them the floor, I'd like to make a short introduction to stress various topics, the topics that we would like to have better engagement of the public. And now all the people have direct communications in real time, which is a great opportunity. I belong to the generation which didn't have from the beginning this internet access, and that's why I could not really share our ideas in this direct line. So it was much more difficult to spread the information and form the respective group of stakeholders. So I'd like to say that certainly this created new opportunities to build a good relationship, find new ways for activists, and to present their demands and to really scale up the efforts. We did in my university certain research in 31 countries with respect to responsible consumption, and we researched did this research in Brazil, and the result was that social media and publicities are two main channels for the consumers to receive information about the proper and correct approaches to consumption. In the United States, 8 of each 10 Americans receive this information through social media. Well, this research was conducted among the adults who are older than 18 years old. And our data cartoon, where we did research in Brazil together with the Center of the Understanding of the Prosperity and British Institute, demonstrated that even in Brazil, those the young people, they are concerned with different changes, like, for instance, climate change, but there is a big majority of those who protest against the climate change, and they support the protective measures to protect the climate and to protect the animals and the life. That's which show us that we have to support this movement and to make it more global, powerful, to protect both the climate and the life. In Brazil, 86% are interested in this subject matter, and 73% of the adults are concerned with these causes and these problems. And thanks to this effort, we can engage more people who could support our efforts in this matter of responsible consumption. So we in my university are trying to develop this correct understanding, the rational understanding of the people, but with respect to the potential impact of responsible consumption, and including the emotional sides and practical sides of bringing the consumers up, so to say, the way in correspondence with this understanding of their own responsibility for stability, for sustainable development. Consumers, as a rule, do not know the exact figures and numbers, and we share with them this knowledge, in thus making them part of this reference group, and thus we are trying to influence their conscience and to help them have better understanding and emotional engagement in to these processes, thus engaging them in these efforts in support of sustainable development. Well, there are many similar moments all around the world, and we'd like to hear from Andre and Monica about these movements, and we can ask actually a question to Monica. So we're talking about the engagement. How do you understand this process of engagement? Maybe you mean that has to be done in certain phases, or, well, in other words, are there any different levels of engagement that we could present as the levels of different levels of responsible consumption, or should we talk in general about this engagement into the process of responsible consumption? Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to discuss this very important topics. I'd like to say that, in fact, we believe, well, first of all, it's very important to define what engagement means. How can we define it? This engagement is the role that you perform, believing that that's your main responsibility, and this is the way that you feel responsible, and thus engage more people around you to work for the same cause. And since we worked a lot with this engagement and the way we understand that time is needed in order to engage an individual in certain topic or a cause, and we even have kind of a graphical curve showing the way of this engagement. I can't even share with you. I'm not sure whether you can see this screen. So as you can see, this is, we use this process because what we understand that people are in different levels of engagement. There is a topic, there is a cause. Then you can collect more information. You can be inside this cause. But there is a zero moment when you start to first hear about this case or this cause. So the first thing you do, you collect the information, and then the individual says, "Aha, now I understand. I know what it's all about." But that's not enough. You need to make your own steps to obtain kind of a context of what you're doing. Now, this individual is not just informed, but a conscious individual who understands what it's all about. And then the next stage is to obtain experience to make an individual sensitive to this cause. And thus the level of engagement grows, increases. And then we do what the next step is kind of convocation when the individual is urged to participate in this course. And to do this, an individual needs some tools to get mobilized to become a promoter, agent of this transformation. So this is what we are working on in our planning with this engagement curve, so that all the stakeholders and actors have a better understanding what is missing for them, so that they can go up more and more levels. And we are looking into potential mobilization when everyone, or I mean, an individual really does something. So that's the way we develop our strategies, with understanding that engagement is face problems. So we need a clear strategy to intensify, to activate this engagement, because by our experience we see that this engagement can be diluted without being properly fed and supported. Thank you very much, Monica. I'd like to thank you for this class on engagement. Indeed, very competent presentation. And you demonstrated this phased engagement, which clearly shows that you did continuous action in order to support this engagement when individuals can be supported in their efforts through their emotions, thus practicing this responsible consumption in their everyday life. And now we'll move to Andrea. In your experience, in your organization, you worked on different engagements, climatic engagement, social life, and you have worked with different social classes, different audiences, different communities. How could you explain the success of your organization in engaging so varied public, so varied audiences, so different audiences? Thank you. I'm pleased to be with you here. Monica, esteemed participants. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that in Virada, my organization, we use different narratives, different languages to orient people. We're oriented to the respective audience. In other words, maybe several decades ago, there were different groups of activists in the society. Now we observe this dilution of the information, and this is a bit scaring when you see that sometimes it's so diluted that your efforts are left without being noted. But we need to share our knowledge, our concerns, and we can present them in different forms, maybe in narrative, maybe expressing our ideas through the digital tools. So I think that one of the things we need to be very careful is to have respect for this forms of approaching the audiences, paying attention to the world around you when you observe different moments. Sometimes you need to be a bit more persistent, to maybe talk directly to the audience, explaining your vision of the world and trying to demonstrate to your audience what's most important from your point of view. And also, you can, let's say, go to the areas where the level of so-called civilized life is much lower, where the people live in the rural areas, sometimes where their life is very far away from what we call normal. Over there, you need to take into account this change in the lifestyle, so you need to use other forms of how you diffuse this information in these communities, where, for instance, sometimes I observe very interesting programs where you just try to gather people somewhere in the central square of their village. They wouldn't even listen to you. So first you need to really make sure that you are being heard. So sometimes that's the whole secret of it, how you make the people listen to you, which is very important for this effective engagement of different audiences, so that you are listened to and then you make them participate in your efforts. So when we deal with different causes, defense of the animals or support to democracy or to education, you sometimes when you hear somebody, you have a feeling as if they were talking about absolutely same topics, no much, and then you lose your strength if you do it in the same way all the time without really paying attention to the real cause that you are fighting for. So when you talk about sustainable development, and you need to show how it is different, what's the difference between this and how it can impact their life depending on where they live. Thank you, Andres. Thank you very much. I think this is an important message that we are all working on the same cause, which is, as you said, this common umbrella that we all need to protect ourselves. But we are here to share, as Monica said, we need to invite people to exchange their experiences so that then after the initial phase, what happens to our students, to our trainees? Because then those who teach actually know what are the main concerns of their trainees. So it's very important to understand the messages that you're trying to deliver to your trainees, to your audience. So this is the work that needs to go bottom up. So these movements have to really be very flexible in order to ensure proper engagement. Monica, I have another question for you. What do you think the enterprises and organizations who are trying to define their cause for purposes to mobilize civil society. Is there any proper way to define, to present their work and their business as the main cause for the public? Well, I'd like to say that this is kind of obligation because the enterprises now are part of any society and they are a very important factor. And because they are engaged and involved into all relevant issues for the society. So they have all this power to transform the society. So there are enterprises which actually operate in several countries at the same time. So they need to transfer this sense of common responsibility to the world surrounding them. Because the surrounding world actually starts with their employees that work there every day. So I think that this movement, this is what is going on. And actually, this is something where we deal with the competence, with vocational emotion. So an enterprise is the best place where all these vocational motivations and other motivations are connected. And also today in the world, with all these topics, the investors actually now demand this approach of the social responsibility from the enterprises when they need to include that into their governance policy. So we can say this is a genuine movement which develops this vision inside an enterprise. And this has become actually now a compliance and obligation for all stakeholders and investors participating in enterprises. So the role of so the enterprises certainly must be engaged more and more in this cause. And they need to think about how to make these topics more relevant and what is the best way to actually generate these messages to the surrounding world. So yeah, that can be a success story, or that can be this greenwashing story, whatever. So all this just creates additional maturity to the enterprises, and now many of them are built in this sense. Thus, they create this legitimate value. Monica, in the sense of methodologies, forms that you use, an enterprise, its attitude to its own business. What's I would say that first you need to look into yourself, your competence, your goals. Sure, you need to take into account the world, but you need to look at yourself, to look at what are your concerns, environmental concerns, climatic concerns, maybe some lack of democracy. So this context always creates some demands so that when you choose your business goal, you take it into account and you become engaged into this approach of what you can add to achieve this transformation, because there are always risks that you lose the vision of this cause, because it's not something that you can buy from the shelf. You talk and talk about the cause, the important cause, etc. It must be done in the way that it makes sense for everybody. When we talk about three so-called, when we you need to be convicted, see, I mean, you need to understand value of your business, of its goal, so that you can defend your cause. Second is coherence, because then it needs to be coherent with your business, or your cause. It needs to be coherent with what you talk. And the third part is that actually what is the way the people work with this consistency, coherence, and then you suddenly can offer something better to the world. Well, it's interesting. You talk about this conviction, coherence, and consistency. Now, this is actually what investors want, what the consumers want, and there are some other that it should be done for convenience or for conviction. Again, we're dealing with letters C. So, what is the right and sincere way to express the idea of an enterprise, how it will help transforming the world? Actually, what can you give to the society to transform it in a positive manner? Yes, you mentioned other two C's, constrictions, convictions, and convenience. Again, we're dealing with 3C. Another question, because we're approaching to, I think we will have time for questions and answers. Well, in your organization, you work on the matters of engagement in a very varied ways, dealing with sustainability and actually when you deal with different ways of communication, when you approach an individual, you're trying to inspire them. And what also you do is that you give some joy to the people. You create in them positive emotions. The two, you think that these elements are central to engage individuals in a specific cause? Well, I really believe that this is a very important tool indeed. And sometimes what we miss is maybe to become liked, to please the people that we are talking to. You know, there are many approaches when you try to intimidate the people, to scare them with something like, if you refer, for instance, to look at current situation in Ukraine, you then certainly need to mention that. But on the other hand, you need to somehow please the people with your narrative. When you share your vision, which is top-down vision, you build it up for the whole world, where everyone likes the stability and all that. So when the people change the vision of the world, when they become more oriented towards stability and sustainability, and they actually add value to this the ideas, and sometimes we need to take the people on board in a maybe more active way. You can present them with vision of the beauty of the globe. Just look around you. Look how many wonders are around you. What I like also, Едуард Женет, це дуже відомий. Едуард Женет, very famous philosopher, well, from Brazil, and he actually was talking about the limbic and cortical systems that need to be very well stabilized, and actually they are the systems that generate our emotions, and then a human being become conscious that actually it's so wonderful around, that it shouldn't be destroyed. It should be sustained, supported, so that the people have this desire, this wish to have more stability and sustainability. So yes, you bring in a bit more of a joy. Rather than, of course, there are dramatic situations when you suddenly can, like that's happening in Ukraine. That's very dramatic story when there are murders, there are killings. We know that many people already perished there, but we know also about very dramatic stories. For instance, when some journalists were killed in Brazil. But also, in addition, I'd like to say that, getting back to our first question, it's very important that the organizations that work on different causes produce information and interpret this information. They shouldn't be just closed. They shouldn't turn into sects. They need to share this information, to be very open, so that this information is accessible to various audiences. For instance, my organization this year, we contacted a number of universities, organizations, including University of Akatu, when we are requesting information, some data that you believe every individual in the world should be aware of, like, for instance, availability of potable water. Then you transform it into graphic format with specific figures. when you make it very clear that you place this figures, this graphic somewhere in the bus stops. Even you do it through graffiti when you place them on the walls, and then this knowledge indeed becomes well spread because the people really need it. Sometimes you feel as if you cannot reach these people, and they need to be reached and by this information. So I remember we had discussions on the subject not years ago, but to generate this knowledge, the people already need to be informed, maybe over-informed. They should be imposed this information, but in a very simple and very accessible manner, so that the people then move forward with their beliefs. Secondly, well, when you mentioned that sometimes even under catastrophic conditions, you still have some opportunities that's open for you. This is what important to stress. Sometimes the people do not know how to make their contribution. And they may be very simple things like new opportunities. As you said, interpret this information into opportunities. I remember in my university, we started some research and on what is most important: energy, water for the people. What else? Water. And it looked like everybody knew how important it was, and we started talking about that. Everyone said, "I understand that very well. I know how important water is, and I don't need to know anything else." But uh, then the people realized that actually, even if you are better aware of what you can do, you can save a lot of water. Like during your life, you can reserve water, which would be enough to fill 3 Olympic swimming pools. So there are always opportunities, but you need to develop this understanding, and then these people start thinking about these questions. Uh, I want to thank Andrei, Monica. We have here some questions from the public. What we have to Monica. We think mostly about social causes. And what stage do you think we are in Brazil? Sometimes we think that we are transforming into an Argentina when what are we evolving? How are we evolving? Well, it's very difficult questions. And the question about this maturity stage where we are. But I'll tell you, in 2003, when we actually returned to this topic, I decided to involve general public to develop better recognitions conscious, because the people tend to wait everything from the government, demand everything from the government without thinking about their role, how they can help to the society. And now I think the people are more conscious about with respect to their role in transformation of the society. But the problem is that there is a large dispersion of understanding of this role. I mean, and the people tend to call it politics, and they think that they just perform their role just by doing something very simple, and that's it. They should not continue. But they need to be conscious about. I mean, we're talking about again about this maturity of engagement. And we think that in Brazil we certainly have better engagement from the side of, say, consumers, enterprises, investors. They start thinking much more about this transformation. So we actually achieved better mobilization, but still there is significant dispersion in this area. And this person will not necessarily bring us to the transformations that will have real impact that we'd like to achieve in Brazil and in the world. So I'd say, yes, I think in Brazil we are more advanced in these activities, but we are still quite far away from the final point where we would like to go. Well, I would take a risk, maybe to reflect a little bit in addition. The people also have difficulties because of their own economic and financial agenda. They are very mobilized in this resolution of their economic issues. And although they can have a will to contribute to a specific cause, it sometimes is too much for them, because even without it, they need to do many other things. Yes, I agree. I mean, we are trying just to make it more natural. New generations have better vision of these transformations that the world needs. And they kind of are now added to their basic agendas, everyday agendas. I understand financial. Our generations now, it's more difficult for us to incorporate this additional load into our duties. We need to be. We didn't need to be politically correct. For instance, there were times when nobody thought about that. Now the new generations are aware of that. Certainly, yes, I agree. Research demonstrates that the young people are more engaged, and actually they want to be part of a certain cause, actually, and work for it. Another question for Andre. You talked about the need to please and co-create using different languages for different audiences. Well, there are examples of famous actors, and every one of them had their own objectives. So can you think about any examples to help with this better engagement? Well, no doubt, engagement of famous artists and actors, etc. All that is very important. Well, certainly we need to be careful with that because sometimes it becomes really frantic for some people. Like you should not insist. You need to have your own cause. You must do this. You must do that, and that sometimes becomes rather fateful. And then again, of course, the role of a leader is very important. The role of activist is important. And here we need to think about these relations with the audience, but without any doubt, it's very important in the world of communications in which we live. You can do whatever research, like you can look at Google Trends, Instagram Trends. You can see that some people are really hurt too. They have this joint, the common cultural denominators, but for example, again, you need to be careful because what? So there are very important people who really have a lot of influence over the mass of public, and these are the people who produce influence, and they also then appear in the social media, but they can generate sometimes very doubtful influence, whether they really generate what needs to be generated. So here, this is a learning process, So to summarize, I can say is very important to count on this participation. Of course, these rock festivals, for instance, where they raise these issues of environmental protection, protection of animals, and here, yes, of course, it's very important. We had some experience in my organization. We organized a campaign, wonderful campaign, where there was a question asked by two famous artists. The question was, how would you paint the world that you want to create? And actually, the questions were given by the Linya Oliveira, Tom Zé, and other very important and popular actors and singers in Brazil. So that actually helped introducing some additional content to many events. And actually, these campaigns then became much more notable. So it's indeed very important that the organizations have this communication. Well, we do our communication, we negotiate, we promote our organizations, but I think that you always need to think whatever organization you're talking about is that you need to think about central elements of this engagement. Without that, you'll just will be moving back or stand at the same point. Well, thank you very much. I think that for this panel, it's very important. So we talk about authenticity of any influence of any engagement, thinking about the consequences of this engagement, consequences of this influence, consequences of the cause that you are promoting. I think that we need to keep in mind that some most important figures of this world clearly made statements against the Russian aggression against Ukraine, which in Brazil is not that emphasized, but this is a decisive position. Nobody should really tolerate any aggression against the human life. So I'd like to thank Andre. I'd like to thank Monica. I want to thank Alvaro always for this opportunity.